You survived the journey. You survived the mountains. You survived the camps and the boomtowns and the brutal arithmetic of broken dreams. But what happens when survival isn't enough? What happens when you finally make it home and discover that the person who left no longer exists? Welcome to the final episode of our California Gold Rush series. Today, you're learning the cruelest lesson of all, that sometimes the most dangerous part of chasing your dreams isn't the failure to achieve them. It's the slow, terrible realization of what you sacrificed to try. You're about to discover that the real gold rush wasn't about finding wealth in California streams. It was about finding out who you really are when everything civilized is stripped away, and whether there's anything left worth bringing home. Close your eyes and feel the weight of years you'll never get back. Feel the stares of family members who no longer recognize the stranger wearing your face. Because the hardest journey isn't getting to California. It's learning to live with what California did to you. The mathematics of return. Your remaining funds barely cover transportation costs for the journey home, requiring travel arrangements that prioritize minimal expense over comfort or convenience during what will likely be weeks of movement through terrain that nearly killed you during the westward journey that began with such different expectations about outcomes. The banker calculates ticket prices, supply costs, and basic expenses for returning east, while accounting for physical condition that makes this journey more dangerous than the original westward travel when your body was healthy and your equipment was adequate for anticipated challenges rather than worn down by years of use under conditions that exceeded design limits. Credit arrangements become necessary for transportation that costs more than available cash resources can cover, creating debt obligations that will follow you home and require payment from future earnings that may not materialize quickly enough to satisfy creditors who understand that desperate customers have limited negotiating power. Your possessions reduce to whatever can be carried personally during travel that won't accommodate wagons, equipment, or supplies that characterized the confident departure from home when this venture seemed likely to produce wealth sufficient to support comfortable return with accumulated savings rather than desperate escape from failed circumstances. The farmer's condition makes travel questionable, as his health problems require medical attention that may not be available during transit through areas where professional care doesn't exist, and emergency situations could prove fatal without proper treatment facilities that were barely adequate even in established communities. Route planning becomes exercise in choosing between options that offer different combinations of cost, safety, and duration, while avoiding paths that might prove impossible for people whose physical condition has been compromised by years of inadequate nutrition and constant stress that eliminated normal reserves of strength and endurance. Your group discusses whether traveling together provides mutual assistance that justifies slower progress and shared expenses, or whether individual departure offers better chances for successful completion of journey that represents final opportunity to salvage something from investment that has already consumed everything originally devoted to this venture. The arithmetic reveals uncomfortable truths about relationships between current resources and minimum requirements for survival during travel that will test physical capability while offering no opportunity to earn additional funds if initial calculations prove inadequate for actual expenses. The weight of goodbye. Leaving the boomtown requires no formal procedures or official notifications, as your departure interests nobody except creditors who understand that pursuing collection from people with no assets wastes effort better devoted to extracting payment from customers who still possess something worth taking. Your final walk through streets that have been home for months or years reveals how little personal connection you've developed with places and people who shared similar circumstances but never became genuine community due to conditions that prevented the social bonding that normally develops among neighbors facing common challenges. The structures that housed your survival efforts will continue standing temporarily until weather, neglect, or fire destroys them, but they'll leave no permanent mark on landscape that will recover eventually from human presence, that proved too brief and desperate to create lasting changes in environment that existed long before gold discovery brought this temporary invasion. Personal possessions that couldn't be carried get abandoned without ceremony, joining accumulated debris from previous departures by people who faced identical decisions about what deserves transportation costs versus what can be left behind for scavengers or whether to claim according to natural processes. Your final conversation with remaining residents occurs without emotional intensity, as shared experiences of failure don't create bonds strong enough to justify maintaining relationships that would require effort and resources better devoted to individual survival during transition back to civilized society that may not welcome damaged veterans. The farmer requires assistance for travel preparation that he can't manage independently, though his condition raises questions about whether he'll survive journey that will demand physical capability he may not possess after years of illness that has progressed beyond what rest and basic medical care can address adequately. No one mentions the possibility of future contact or reunion, as circumstances that brought you together will end with departure, and the people you become during this experience may not prove compatible with the identities you'll need to resume for successful reintegration into communities that continue developing normally while you are being reduced to survival concerns. Your departure occurs without witnesses except fellow travelers who face identical challenges, creating final separation from chapter of life that will remain permanently disconnected from whatever follows, if anything follows successfully. The texture of travel. The eastward journey begins with your body's immediate protest against demands for sustained physical effort after years of malnutrition and constant stress that eliminated reserves of strength and endurance that healthy people take for granted when planning activities that require basic biological capability. Walking becomes conscious effort rather than automatic activity, as each step requires deliberate decision about foot placement and weight distribution on terrain that seems more treacherous than you remember from westward travel, when optimism and better physical condition made similar challenges feel manageable rather than potentially dangerous. Your reduced baggage still feels heavy despite containing only essential items, revealing how much your physical capability has deteriorated during experiences that transformed healthy merchant into survival-focused laborer, whose body shows permanent evidence of abuse that proper medical care might address but can't entirely reverse. Weather affects you more severely than during previous travel, as inadequate clothing and reduced physical resilience make ordinary discomfort feel genuinely threatening to basic survival, while offering no opportunity to purchase better protection against conditions that seem designed to prevent successful completion of this journey. The farmer's condition worsens immediately as travel demands exceed his compromised capability, requiring group assistance that slows progress while raising questions about whether his survival depends on reaching medical care that may not exist along routes that avoid established communities where help might be available. Food costs along the route prove even higher than boomtown prices, as merchants understand that travelers have no alternatives and must pay whatever is demanded for basic nutrition needed to continue moving toward destinations that represent final opportunity to escape circumstances that have already consumed everything originally invested. Your group's progress falls short of planned daily distances as reality conflicts with optimistic calculations about capability and endurance that seemed reasonable during planning sessions but prove inadequate when tested against actual conditions that include physical deterioration and equipment failure. Sleep provides inadequate recovery as cold, discomfort, and worry about successful completion combine to prevent rest that would be necessary for maintaining physical and mental function during extended travel that offers no opportunity for proper recuperation from accumulated exhaustion. The weight of memory. Your recollections of the westward journey prove unreliable when compared to current eastward experience over identical terrain, revealing how hope and physical health had created optimistic interpretation of challenges that now seem genuinely threatening when faced by people whose capability has been reduced by circumstances that permanently altered both body and mind. The excitement and camaraderie that characterize group dynamics during westward travel can't be recreated when shared experience involves failure rather than anticipated success, creating social atmosphere focused on individual survival rather than mutual support for achieving common goals that no longer exist in meaningful form. Locations where you once made optimistic plans about California prospects now serve as reminders of how completely circumstances can change while terrain remains identical, demonstrating that human perception depends more on internal condition than external environment when evaluating possibilities for success or failure. Your relationship with landscape changes as natural features that once seemed beautiful and inspiring now appear hostile and indifferent to human survival, creating emotional distance from environment that reflects psychological damage resulting from experiences that eliminated romantic notions about nature and wilderness. Letters and documents from home that you preserved throughout the westward journey and California residence now feel like artifacts from someone else's life, representing relationships and obligations that may no longer be relevant to the person you become through exposure to conditions that transform identity in permanent ways. The farmer's deteriorating condition serves as constant reminder of long-term consequences that extend beyond immediate failure, demonstrating how some effects of this venture will persist regardless of whether return home proves successful or whether normal life can be resumed after such fundamental transformation. Your mental images of home and family become increasingly abstract and difficult to connect with current reality, as the gap between civilized expectation and survival experience grows too large for meaningful integration of past identity with present circumstances that have eliminated most characteristics that once defined personality. Dreams during fitful sleep include memories that feel more like stories about strangers than recollections of personal experience, suggesting that psychological distance from previous life may prove more difficult to bridge than geographical distance from California failures. The sound of silence. Conversations become less frequent as physical exhaustion and emotional disappointment eliminate energy for communication that doesn't serve immediate practical purposes, creating social atmosphere where essential information gets exchanged efficiently while personal sharing becomes luxury that survival can't accommodate. Your group travels through landscape in near-complete quiet, broken only by necessary discussion about route conditions, rest requirements, and basic survival decisions that affect everyone's safety during journey, that offers no margin for error or misunderstanding about critical matters. The absence of optimistic speculation about future possibilities creates acoustic environment dominated by natural sounds rather than human planning, as wind, water, and wildlife provide soundtrack for retreat that contrasts sharply with excited conversation that characterized westward travel. Arguments decrease in frequency despite increased stress, as exhaustion eliminates even the energy required for conflict among people who understand that disagreement wastes resources needed for basic survival while producing no useful results for anyone involved in disputes about matters beyond individual control. Your own voice sounds different when communication becomes necessary, lacking confidence and enthusiasm that once characterized discussions about opportunities and replacing them with careful neutrality that avoids commitment to outcomes that experience suggests are unlikely to occur regardless of hope or determination. The farmer's labored breathing becomes most consistent human sound in your traveling group, serving as constant reminder of physical consequences that will persist long after geographical return home, if return home proves possible for someone whose health has been permanently compromised by this venture. Natural silence feels oppressive rather than peaceful, as absence of human conversation eliminates distraction from internal awareness of failure and physical deterioration that can't be ignored when external activity doesn't provide alternative focus for attention and mental energy. Sleep brings no relief from quiet that emphasizes isolation from normal human community, as dreams occur without the background noise of social activity that once provided unconscious reassurance that you belonged to civilization rather than existing as damaged survivor of circumstances that eliminated most connections to healthy human society. The geography of return. The terrain that challenged you during westward travel now seems impossibly difficult when attempted by people whose physical condition has deteriorated to levels that make ordinary obstacles feel genuinely dangerous rather than merely inconvenient challenges that healthy travelers could manage with reasonable effort and basic preparation. River crossings that posed manageable problems during optimistic westward journey now require careful planning and group assistance to prevent accidents that could prove fatal when attempted by people whose strength and balance have been compromised by years of malnutrition and constant stress under conditions that exceeded normal human tolerance. Mountain passes that once seemed like exciting adventure now appear as threatening barriers that must be overcome through careful rationing of limited energy reserves while maintaining vigilance about weather conditions that could trap weakened travelers in environments where rescue wouldn't be possible. Your reduced pace means covering distances that would have been easy days' travel during westward journey now requires multiple days of careful progress with frequent rest stops to prevent complete exhaustion that could strand the group in locations where help doesn't exist and supplies can't be replenished. The farmer's condition makes every elevation change a significant challenge as his compromised breathing struggles with altitude and exertion that healthy people would barely notice, creating delays that consume precious travel time while winter weather approaches with threatening inevitability. Landmarks that once provided encouragement about progress toward California now serve as reminders of how far you still must travel to reach safety, with each familiar location measuring remaining distance rather than distance already accomplished during journey that feels increasingly desperate with each mile. Your route selection prioritizes avoiding difficult terrain over maintaining direct path toward home, creating longer journey that may be safer for people whose physical capability can't handle challenges that would have been routine during previous travel when health and equipment were adequate for normal demands. Navigation becomes more critical as group resources can't accommodate mistakes that would merely delay healthy travelers, but could prove fatal when attempted by people whose survival depends on reaching assistance before strength and supplies run out completely. The arithmetic of decline. Daily calculations about food consumption versus remaining supplies reveal mathematical relationships that suggest current rations may not last until reaching locations where resupply becomes possible, forcing decisions about whether to reduce intake below levels needed for maintaining travel capability. Your physical deterioration accelerates during sustained travel, as accumulated damage from years of inadequate nutrition becomes more apparent when body must perform sustained effort rather than the irregular work patterns that characterized mining activities under controlled conditions. The banker's systematic approach to resource management documents daily decline in group capability measured against distance remaining and obstacles ahead, creating numerical evidence that success depends on factors beyond individual determination or careful planning. Water requirements increase due to physical stress of travel, while sources become less reliable along routes chosen for safety rather than convenience, creating additional pressure on supplies that were calculated based on normal consumption rather than current desperate circumstances. Equipment failure occurs more frequently, as worn tools and damaged gear can't withstand demands of extended travel, requiring repairs that consume time and materials while producing results that barely meet minimum standards for basic function rather than reliable performance. Medical problems compound as minor injuries and illnesses that would heal naturally under normal conditions become serious concerns when experienced by people whose immune systems and physical reserves have been depleted by prolonged exposure to survival conditions. Your clothing degrades rapidly under travel, demands that exceed what worn garments can tolerate, creating protection problems that affect body temperature regulation and comfort during journey that already challenges physical capability beyond reasonable limits. The group's collective financial resources diminish faster than anticipated as emergency expenses arise for problems that careful planning couldn't predict, creating budget shortfalls that threaten ability to purchase essential supplies during critical phases of journey that offer no alternatives to success. The weight of recognition. Your reflection in stream water reveals someone whose appearance would shock family members who remember the confident merchant who departed with careful grooming and social presentation appropriate for successful business travel rather than desperate survival under conditions that eliminate attention to personal appearance. Physical changes include permanent alterations to posture, movement, and general bearing that mark you clearly as someone who has experienced prolonged hardship rather than normal travel or temporary adventure that leaves no lasting evidence of difficult circumstances endured and overcome. Your hands show scars, calluses, and other permanent damage that will serve as lifelong reminders of manual labor performed under conditions that civilized work practices would consider dangerous, creating visible evidence of transformation that can't be hidden through improved clothing or social presentation. Mental processes have adapted to focus on immediate survival concerns rather than complex planning or abstract thinking that characterized intellectual life when basic needs were satisfied automatically through community infrastructure that doesn't exist under current circumstances. Emotional responses reflect permanent changes in personality that result from exposure to conditions that would traumatize people who grew up expecting basic security and social support, rather than daily struggle against circumstances designed to break human spirits through systematic deprivation. Your speech patterns have changed to accommodate practical communication rather than social interaction, eliminating elaborate courtesy and emotional expression that require energy better devoted to essential activities that determine whether basic survival continues to be possible. Relationships with concepts like comfort, luxury, and social status have been fundamentally altered by experiences that revealed how quickly civilized amenities disappear when institutional support fails and individual survival becomes only priority that matters for maintaining biological function. The person who will eventually arrive home, if arrival proves possible, bears little resemblance to the individual who departed with confidence about returning wealthy and successful from venture that seemed reasonable when planned, in comfortable circumstances that now feel impossibly distant and luxurious. The texture of civilization. Your first contact with established communities along the return route reveals how much distance has grown between your current condition and normal social expectations for behavior, appearance, and interaction patterns that civilized people maintain automatically through institutional support and community standards. Merchants and innkeepers treat your group with suspicion and distaste that reflects their immediate assessment of people whose physical condition and social presentation mark them clearly as survivors of circumstances that respectable society prefers not to acknowledge or accommodate within normal business relationships. The contrast between your group's survival-focused behavior and normal social interaction creates uncomfortable situations where basic courtesy requires energy and attention that you've learned to devote entirely to practical concerns about immediate physical needs, rather than maintaining relationships that don't contribute directly to continued existence. Your reduced financial resources limit access to services that normal travelers expect as standard accommodation, forcing acceptance of conditions that barely meet minimum requirements, while consuming most available funds that must last throughout remaining journey to destinations that seem increasingly distant. Communication with civilized people requires conscious effort to modify speech patterns and topic selection away from survival concerns toward social pleasantries that feel artificial and wasteful when resources should be conserved for essential activities rather than cultural performance that serves no practical purpose. The farmer's obvious illness creates additional social problems as his condition generates concern about contagion among people who understand that disease spreads easily in crowded accommodations, leading to discrimination that affects the entire group's access to adequate food and shelter. Your appearance generates stares and whispered conversations among residents whose comfortable lives have never included exposure to people who look like survivors of circumstances that civilized communities prefer to treat as theoretical problems, rather than actual conditions that produce visible human consequences. Simple interactions like purchasing supplies or arranging transportation become complicated by social dynamics that favor customers who meet normal expectations for cleanliness, behavior, and financial reliability over desperate travelers whose condition suggests questionable background and uncertain ability to pay for services. The weight of questions. Family letters that catch up with your group at mail stations reveal how life continued developing normally in your absence, creating awareness of social changes, personal growth, and community events that occurred while you were reduced to basic survival concerns that allowed no participation in civilized human development. Your wife's correspondence describes daily activities and local news that seem impossibly luxurious compared to your recent experience of conditions where basic survival required constant attention, making normal domestic concerns feel like descriptions of life in a different universe entirely. Children's letters include questions about your experiences and expectations about gifts or stories that reveal their assumption that your absence involved adventure rather than degradation. Creating communication challenges about how to explain circumstances that would horrify family members while avoiding lies that would damage relationships. The gap between family expectations and actual results becomes mathematically clear as letters request information about return timeline and financial success that bear no relationship to reality, where survival represents achievement rather than minimum expectation for reasonable adults pursuing legitimate opportunities. Community news includes deaths, marriages, business changes, and social developments that continued normally while you were experiencing conditions that eliminated participation in civilized life, demonstrating how completely your existence diverged from normal human social development during absence that seemed temporary but proved transformative. Your responses to family correspondence require careful editing to avoid describing conditions that would cause unnecessary worry, while also avoiding false optimism about circumstances that show no sign of improvement through continued effort under conditions that seem designed to prevent rather than reward individual persistence. Financial questions from family members about sending money home or supporting dependents who trusted your judgment about this venture create guilt and anxiety that compound existing stress about return journey that may not prove successful even if physical survival becomes possible. The distance between your current reality and family understanding grows larger with each exchange of letters that reveal how impossible meaningful communication has become across gaps that measure more than geographical separation between California and home communities that continued functioning normally. The sound of doubt. Your internal voice, when considering future possibilities, lacks the confidence that once characterized planning discussions about opportunities and goals, replacing certainty with careful assessment of limitations that experience has revealed about both personal capability and external circumstances beyond individual control. Conversations with fellow travelers about prospects for successful reintegration into civilized society carry undertones of uncertainty about whether people who have been fundamentally changed by survival experiences can resume relationships and social roles that require characteristics that may have been permanently altered. The farmer's labored breathing serves as constant audio reminder that some consequences of this venture will persist regardless of geographical return home, creating background awareness that physical and psychological damage may prove more permanent than originally anticipated when this journey began. Questions about employment possibilities arise regularly as group members realize that previous skills and business relationships may not provide adequate foundation for supporting families who depend on income from people whose capability has been compromised by experiences that eliminated normal career development. Discussions about explaining absence to family and community members reveal shared anxiety about bridging gaps between survival experience and civilized expectation through communication that preserves relationships while acknowledging reality of fundamental personal transformation that occurred during conditions that civilized people can't understand. Your own voice, when practicing explanations for family conversations, sounds unconvincing even to yourself, suggesting that honest description of circumstances would damage relationships, while false reassurance would create foundations for future problems when truth becomes apparent through ongoing interaction. Planning conversations about resuming normal life include recognition that comfort with civilized amenities may have been permanently affected by adaptation to conditions where luxury meant having adequate food and shelter, rather than the elaborate social and material expectations that characterize middle-class existence. The absence of optimistic speculation about future success creates silence where hopeful planning once occurred, replaced by practical discussion about immediate survival needs during remaining journey that represents final test of whether return home proves possible for people whose condition suggests uncertain prospects for long-term stability. The mathematics of re-entry. Your calculations about resuming previous employment reveal how much earning capacity has been damaged by years absent from business relationships that continue developing without your participation, while competitors established advantages that may prove impossible to overcome through individual effort alone. The banker's systematic analysis of financial recovery prospects documents the mathematical impossibility of restoring previous economic status when current debt obligations exceed realistic income projections based on diminished capability and reduced market position that resulted from pursuing opportunities that proved non-existent. Creditworthiness has been destroyed by absence and visible failure, eliminating access to business financing that would be necessary for re-establishing commercial activities at levels that could support family obligations and community standing that once seemed permanently secure through careful planning and conservative management. Professional skills have been replaced by survival capabilities that serve no useful purpose in civilized commerce, creating education gaps that would require time and money for correction, while competing against people who continued normal career development during years when you were learning to extract minimal gold from resistant earth. Your physical appearance and social presentation require improvement that costs money unavailable for cosmetic concerns when basic nutrition and medical care compete for resources insufficient to address all essential needs simultaneously while maintaining minimum standards for community acceptance. Employment opportunities that match current capability tend toward manual labor that pays wages insufficient for supporting middle-class family obligations, creating economic pressure that could force social degradation beyond what has already occurred through exposure to conditions that eliminated previous status and expectations. The gap between family financial needs and realistic earning potential creates arithmetic problems that suggest permanent reduction in living standards, rather than temporary hardship that could be overcome through persistence and careful budgeting over reasonable time periods. Insurance, savings, and other financial security measures that once provided protection against economic uncertainty were consumed by this venture, leaving no cushion against future problems that could prove catastrophic when experienced by people whose resources have been eliminated through pursuit of opportunities that never existed. The weight of strangers. Your wife's letters describe someone whose personality and interests have continued developing during your absence, creating awareness that relationships may have changed in ways that make reunion more complicated than simple geographical return to familiar locations and resumption of previous domestic arrangements. Children who were young when you departed have grown and developed characteristics that reflect their mother's influence and community values rather than paternal guidance that was absent during critical periods of personality formation and social learning that occur once and can't be repeated or corrected through later attention. Family financial management has adapted to function without your income or decision-making participation, creating household systems that may not accommodate return of authority figure whose judgment has been questioned by failure that affects everyone who trusted your assessment of California opportunities. Community relationships have adjusted to your absence through social changes that filled roles you once occupied, while business associations have developed alternative arrangements that serve current needs without requiring accommodation of returning participant whose reliability has been compromised by demonstrated poor judgment. Your position within extended family dynamics has shifted as relatives who once sought your advice or financial assistance have developed independence that may not welcome return of someone whose current condition suggests ongoing problems rather than renewed stability and capability. Neighbors and community members have formed opinions about your venture based on incomplete information and social prejudices that may not be easily overcome through explanation or demonstration of current good character and reformed judgment about future decision-making. The farmer's obvious decline serves as visible evidence that affects how people evaluate your entire group's credibility and social acceptability, creating guilt by association that influences reception regardless of individual responsibility for circumstances that produced current conditions. Your understanding of family and community relationships changes as evidence accumulates that social bonds prove more fragile than expected when tested by prolonged absence and visible failure, that challenges assumptions about character and judgment that once seemed permanently established through years of reliable behavior and sound decisions. The texture of loss. Personal possessions that represented connection to previous identity have been sold, abandoned, or destroyed during years of survival that prioritized immediate necessity over sentimental value, eliminating physical reminders of who you used to be before circumstances required fundamental transformation. Your home has been sold or rented to cover expenses during absence that lasted longer and cost more than anticipated, creating housing problems that add practical concerns to emotional challenges of resuming domestic life under conditions that bear little resemblance to previous comfortable arrangements. Tools, books, and equipment that represented professional identity and personal interests have been replaced by survival gear that serves no useful purpose in civilized contexts, requiring replacement that costs money unavailable for restoring previous lifestyle and social presentation. Clothing that once reflected social status and personal care has been replaced by functional garments that prioritize durability over appearance, creating wardrobe problems that affect social interaction and employment prospects in communities where presentation influences acceptance and opportunity. Photographs, documents, and personal papers that connected current existence to family history and social identity were lost or abandoned during circumstances that required choosing between sentiment and survival, eliminating tangible evidence of previous life and relationships. The few personal items that survived the journey serve as painful reminders of loss rather than comforting connections to better times, creating emotional responses that interfere with forward progress rather than providing foundation for rebuilding efforts. Your relationship with material possessions has been permanently altered by experiences that revealed how quickly comfort disappears when survival becomes primary concern, making normal consumer desires feel artificial and wasteful rather than legitimate expressions of personal preference and social status. The absence of familiar objects that once provided environment for normal domestic life creates practical problems for resuming family relationships that require shared space and activities currently impossible due to lack of basic household infrastructure that was taken for granted before this venture eliminated previous accumulations of comfort and security. The sound of recognition. Your voice, when attempting normal conversation with civilized people, sounds foreign even to yourself, lacking the social fluency and emotional range that characterized previous personality before circumstances reduced communication to practical exchanges about immediate survival concerns rather than complex human interaction. Family members who speak with you by letter or in person notice changes in speech patterns, topic selection, and general manner that suggest fundamental alterations in character rather than temporary adaptation to difficult circumstances that could be reversed through return to normal environment and social expectations. The farmer's increasingly labored breathing during conversations serves as constant reminder that some changes prove permanent regardless of medical attention or improved living conditions, creating audio background that emphasizes how deeply this experience has altered everyone involved in ways that may persist indefinitely. Your responses to questions about California experiences require careful modulation to avoid describing conditions that would horrify listeners, while also avoiding false cheerfulness that would misrepresent reality and create unrealistic expectations about personal condition and future prospects for normal social development. Conversations with former business associates reveal communication gaps that extend beyond simple absence of shared recent experience to fundamental differences in priorities, concerns, and basic understanding of what constitutes reasonable human existence and appropriate response to challenging circumstances. Children who remember your departure respond to your return with mixture of excitement and confusion about changes in appearance, behavior, and emotional availability that make father-child relationships more complicated than simple resumption of previous domestic patterns and family dynamics. The social rhythm of normal conversation feels artificial and demanding when attempted by someone whose mental energy has been devoted entirely to practical survival concerns, creating exhaustion from interactions that once provided pleasure and social connection rather than requiring conscious effort and emotional management. Your ability to participate in community discussions about local politics, business developments, and social events has been compromised by prolonged focus on immediate physical needs, making normal civic engagement feel irrelevant to someone whose recent experience included daily calculation of basic survival probability. The geography of displacement. The physical landscape of home appears smaller and more confining than memory suggested during years when survival required constant movement through challenging terrain that made current domestic environment seem impossibly comfortable and secure by comparison with recent experience of genuine hardship. Your former house feels simultaneously familiar and foreign, as rooms that once provided adequate space now seem either too large for practical use or too small for someone whose living requirements have been simplified to basic shelter rather than elaborate domestic comfort that characterized previous middle-class expectations. Community buildings and public spaces trigger complex emotional responses that combine nostalgia for previous social participation with alienation from activities and concerns that seem trivial compared to survival challenges that once required constant attention and immediate practical decision-making about life-threatening circumstances. The absence of visible hardship in civilized surroundings creates discomfort rather than relief, as adaptation to survival conditions has created psychological need for environmental awareness and practical vigilance that serves no useful purpose in communities where basic security gets provided automatically through institutional support. Your relationship with familiar places includes recognition that comfortable memories may have been idealized through comparison with desperate circumstances, while current reality fails to provide satisfaction expected from return to locations that represented safety and social connection during difficult periods. Streets, businesses, and neighborhood features that once seemed permanent and reliable now appear fragile and temporary to someone whose experience includes watching entire communities develop and disappear according to economic pressures and social dynamics that civilized people rarely observe directly. The farmer's difficulty navigating familiar terrain due to his deteriorated physical condition serves as visible reminder that geographic return doesn't guarantee restoration of previous capability or comfort, even in environments designed to support rather than challenge human physical and social needs. Climate and weather that once seemed normal now feel either too mild to require serious attention or too severe for someone whose tolerance has been permanently altered by exposure to conditions that pushed biological adaptation beyond normal limits while creating ongoing sensitivity to environmental variation. The weight of time. Your daily routine lacks the structure and purpose that survival conditions imposed through necessity, creating freedom that feels more like emptiness when previous goals and motivations have been eliminated by experiences that revealed their artificial nature and limited importance for actual human welfare. Hours pass without the immediate demands that characterized recent existence, though leisure time provides no pleasure when mental habits have been shaped by constant awareness of practical concerns that required immediate attention rather than the delayed gratification that normal planning and social development typically include. The concept of future planning becomes difficult when recent experience demonstrated how quickly circumstances can change in ways that make careful preparation irrelevant or counterproductive, while family obligations require commitment to stability that may not prove realistic given current physical and psychological condition. Your relationship with work schedules and social commitments has been altered by exposure to conditions where time got measured by immediate survival needs, rather than artificial schedules imposed by social convention and commercial requirements that may not accommodate ongoing health problems and reduced capability. Sleep patterns remain disrupted despite return to safe environment, as hypervigilance and anxiety developed during survival conditions continue affecting rest quality, while creating exhaustion that interferes with normal daily activities and social interaction that family and community relationships require. Memory gaps about previous life combine with vivid recollections of survival experiences to create temporal confusion, where recent hardships feel more real than earlier comfort, making integration of past and present identity more complicated than simple resumption of interrupted social roles. The farmer's decline accelerates despite improved medical care and nutrition, suggesting that some damage proves irreversible regardless of environmental improvements, creating awareness that time lost during this venture may represent permanent rather than temporary sacrifice of normal human development. Your perception of aging has been altered by experiences that compressed years of normal stress into brief periods of extreme survival challenges, making current age feel both older due to accumulated damage and younger due to social development that was interrupted during critical periods of adult maturation. The arithmetic of adaptation. Your attempts to resume previous financial management reveal how much basic mathematical relationships have changed when current income prospects can't support previous lifestyle expectations, requiring fundamental adjustment to living standards that may prove permanent rather than temporary reduction during recovery period. Family budget calculations include ongoing medical expenses for health problems that resulted directly from survival conditions, creating financial obligations that consume resources needed for normal domestic maintenance while offering uncertain prospects for improvement through treatment that may not reverse damage already sustained. Employment possibilities that match current physical capability provide compensation insufficient for supporting family obligations that accumulated during absence, while positions that offer adequate income require abilities that may have been permanently compromised by experiences that prioritized survival over skill development. The banker's systematic documentation of reintegration costs reveals mathematical impossibility of restoring previous economic status within timeframes that family stability requires, creating pressure for accepting social degradation as permanent consequence rather than temporary hardship that could be overcome through persistence. Credit applications get rejected based on employment gaps and visible health problems that suggest unreliable income potential, eliminating access to financing that would be necessary for re-establishing business activities or purchasing basic household necessities that civilized families normally take for granted. Insurance coverage becomes unavailable or prohibitively expensive due to pre-existing health conditions that resulted from survival experiences, creating vulnerability to future medical expenses that could prove catastrophic for people whose financial resources have been eliminated through pursuit of opportunities that never existed. Daily expenses for basic nutrition, clothing, and shelter exceed available income even when lifestyle gets reduced to minimum standards that barely meet social expectations for respectable family maintenance in communities where appearance affects employment prospects and social acceptance. Your relationship with money changes fundamentally as survival experiences revealed how quickly financial security disappears when circumstances eliminate normal income sources, making current economic planning feel simultaneously more urgent and more futile than previous confident assumptions about financial stability. The democracy of damage. Every member of your traveling group faces similar challenges with reintegration that suggest systematic rather than individual problems, creating shared understanding of how survival experiences affect people regardless of previous social status, education, or personal characteristics that once seemed to guarantee different outcomes. The farmer's obvious physical decline affects how community members evaluate your entire group's credibility and social acceptability, demonstrating how visible damage influences reception of all returning miners regardless of individual responsibility for circumstances that produced current conditions. Former business associates treat you with mixture of sympathy and suspicion that reflects their uncertainty about whether survival experiences indicate character strength or character weakness, creating social ambiguity that affects professional relationships and commercial opportunities. Family members struggle with conflicting emotions about your return that combine relief about survival with disappointment about failure, while children respond to changes in personality and capability that make parent-child relationships more complicated than simple resumption of previous domestic patterns. Community attitudes toward returning gold seekers range from curiosity to contempt, with most people expressing opinions based on assumptions about mining camp experiences rather than actual knowledge of conditions that produced visible changes in appearance, behavior, and social capability. Your reduced social status affects not just personal relationships, but family, standing within community hierarchies that determine access to business opportunities, social activities, and educational possibilities for children whose futures depend partly on parental reputation and economic stability. The few miners who return with modest success become objects of envy and resentment rather than inspiration, as their achievements highlight failure of majority while providing evidence that success remained theoretically possible for people with different luck, timing, or capability. Medical professionals who examine returning miners document patterns of physical and psychological damage that affect entire populations of gold seekers, creating systematic evidence of how survival conditions produce predictable human costs, regardless of individual character or previous health status. The texture of survival. Your daily routine includes constant awareness of resources and potential threats that serves no useful purpose in civilized environment, but continues affecting behavior and decision, making through psychological patterns that develop during survival conditions where such vigilance proved essential for continued existence. Food consumption habits remain influenced by scarcity experiences that created hoarding behaviors and gratitude for basic nutrition that seems excessive in contexts where adequate meals are normally available through routine domestic arrangements rather than careful resource management and constant concern about supply security. Sleep continues to be disrupted by hypervigilance and anxiety that developed during circumstances where relaxation could prove dangerous, creating ongoing exhaustion that affects daily capability, while family members struggle to understand why safe environment doesn't provide expected relief from stress. Your tolerance for discomfort remains higher than normal social expectations, while tolerance for normal social demands has been reduced by adaptation to survival priorities that eliminated energy for elaborate courtesy and emotional management that civilized interaction normally requires for maintaining community relationships. Physical habits include automatic assessment of escape routes, resource locations, and potential hazards that characterized survival behavior but appear paranoid or antisocial when displayed in domestic contexts where such awareness seems inappropriate for normal family and community life. Risk evaluation continues to be influenced by survival experiences where conservative assessment prevented dangerous mistakes, creating reluctance to commit to normal domestic and commercial activities that require confidence about future stability and resource availability. Your relationship with comfort includes ongoing surprise at availability of basic amenities that survival conditions made seem luxurious, while simultaneously feeling dissatisfied with conveniences that once provided pleasure but now seem artificial and unnecessary for actual human welfare and happiness. Personal hygiene and appearance receive attention that reflects survival priorities rather than social expectations, as standards developed during resource scarcity don't match community norms for respectable presentation, while energy allocation continues to favor practical concerns over cosmetic improvement. The weight of truth. Your conversations with family members about California experiences require constant editing to balance honesty about circumstances with protection of people who trust your judgment and need to maintain faith in decision-making that affected their security and future prospects through consequences they couldn't have anticipated or prevented. The gap between promotional descriptions that motivated this venture and actual conditions encountered creates recognition of systematic deception that may not have been intentionally malicious, but which produced devastating effects on people who made major life decisions based on incomplete and misleading information about opportunities. Children's questions about adventure and wealth require responses that acknowledge failure without destroying their confidence in parental wisdom, while family financial needs demand explanation of why years of absence and hardship produced no positive results despite enormous investment of time, health, and previous security. Your relationship with your own judgment changes as evidence accumulates that intelligent, careful people can make catastrophically wrong decisions when presented with information that sounds reasonable but proves disconnected from reality, that participants couldn't evaluate without direct experience that cost everything to obtain. Community members who invested emotionally or financially in your success struggle with implications of failure that suggest their own vulnerability to similar deception, creating social pressure to minimize or rationalize circumstances rather than acknowledge systematic problems that could affect other community decisions. The banker's methodical documentation of venture costs versus results provides mathematical evidence that promotional materials bore no relationship to actual economic conditions, though such analysis offers little comfort to people whose lives have been permanently altered by pursuing opportunities that never existed. Medical professionals who examine returning minors recognize patterns of physical and psychological damage that suggest environmental causes rather than individual failure, creating professional obligation to document conditions that produce predictable human costs regardless of personal character or previous health status. Your understanding of American opportunity rhetoric changes as experience demonstrates how easily desperate people can be manipulated through appeals to optimism and individual determination that ignore systematic factors favoring suppliers over workers in economic relationships designed to extract rather than create wealth. The sound of silence. Family dinners occur with less conversation than memory suggested from previous domestic life, as shared experiences no longer provide foundation for communication between people whose development diverged during years when survival concerns eliminated participation in normal social and emotional growth that continued among family members. Your voice, when attempting normal domestic interaction, lacks emotional range and social fluency that characterized previous personality, creating awkward pauses and stilted exchanges that emphasize distance between current condition and family expectations for resumed relationships and household participation. Children respond to your presence with mixture of excitement and uncertainty about changes in personality and capability that make father-child relationships different from pre-departure patterns, though they adapt more easily than adults to altered family dynamics and reduced domestic comfort levels. The farmer's condition continues deteriorating despite improved medical care and nutrition, with his labored breathing serving as constant reminder that some damage proves irreversible regardless of environmental improvements that arrive too late to prevent permanent harm from survival experiences. Community social events feel simultaneously familiar and foreign as conversation topics. Behavioral expectations and general atmosphere reflect normal concerns that seem irrelevant to someone whose recent experience included daily calculation of basic survival probability rather than worry about social standing and commercial success. Your wife's attempts at normal conversation about domestic concerns, community news, and future planning encounter responses that reveal how much mental focus remains devoted to practical survival awareness, despite return to environment where such vigilance serves no useful purpose. Letters from other returning miners describe similar experiences with family reintegration challenges that suggest systematic rather than individual problems, creating network of shared understanding among people whose common experience remains largely incommunicable to family members who continued normal development. The absence of optimistic discussion about future possibilities creates acoustic environment where silence replaces hopeful planning, as realistic assessment of current circumstances eliminates comfortable illusions about recovery timelines and eventual restoration of previous social and economic status. The geography of memory. Your recollections of pre-departure life become increasingly dreamlike and difficult to reconcile with current reality, as survival experiences created memories so vivid and immediate that comfortable past seems like stories about someone else's existence rather than personal history that occurred just years ago. The physical spaces of home feel both too large and too small compared to survival accommodations that range from open wilderness to crowded mining camps, creating spatial disorientation that affects comfort and functionality within domestic environments designed for different lifestyle requirements and social expectations. Your relationship with familiar objects includes recognition that sentimental value depends on psychological condition, that may have been permanently altered by experiences that reduced human worth to immediate practical utility rather than emotional significance or cultural meaning that civilized communities normally preserve. Neighborhood streets and community buildings trigger complex emotional responses that combine nostalgia for previous social participation with alienation from activities and concerns that seem trivial compared to survival challenges that once required constant attention and life-threatening decision-making responsibilities. The farmer's inability to resume previous agricultural activities due to his deteriorated physical condition serves as visible reminder that geographic return doesn't guarantee restoration of previous capability, even in environments designed to support rather than challenge human physical and social needs. Weather patterns and seasonal changes affect you differently than before departure, as survival experiences created sensitivity to environmental variation that makes normal climate feel either too mild to require serious attention or too severe for someone whose tolerance has been permanently altered by extreme exposure. Memory gaps about previous routine and social relationships combine with vivid recollections of survival experiences to create temporal confusion where hardships feel more real than comfort, making integration of past and present identity more complicated than simple resumption of interrupted social roles. Your perception of community stability has been altered by witnessing how quickly human settlements can appear and disappear according to economic pressures, making familiar institutions seem more fragile and temporary than they appeared before exposure to social conditions that revealed impermanence underlying apparent security. The arithmetic of aftermath. Your final accounting reveals complete transformation rather than simple failure, as the person who returned home bears little resemblance to the individual who departed with confidence about accumulating wealth through individual effort under conditions that proved fundamentally different from advertised opportunities and reasonable expectations. Years of life have been invested in pursuit of dreams that existed primarily in promotional materials designed to separate hopeful people from their savings, health, and normal human development through systematic exploitation of optimism and desperation that affects entire populations seeking improvement through individual rather than collective action. The knowledge gained includes understanding of how quickly civilized behavior disappears when institutional support fails, how easily people can be deceived about opportunities that sound reasonable but prove unworkable, and how survival experiences produce permanent changes in personality and social capability that affect family relationships. Physical and psychological damage will persist, regardless of medical attention or environmental improvement, creating lifetime consequences for decisions made with incomplete information about costs that extend beyond financial investment to include fundamental alteration of identity, health, and social integration that may never fully recover. Your family's financial security has been eliminated through pursuit of opportunities that consumed previous savings while producing no positive results, creating economic vulnerability that affects not just current living standards, but future prospects for children whose education and social development require resources that no longer exist. The possibility of warning others about similar deception feels both urgent and futile, as people motivated by desperate circumstances often ignore evidence that contradicts their hope for individual solutions to systematic problems that require collective rather than personal responses to economic and social challenges. Community attitudes toward returning minors range from sympathy to contempt, with most people preferring explanations that blame individual failure rather than acknowledging systematic deception that could affect their own decision-making about opportunities that sound too good to refuse but prove too costly to survive. You fall asleep in familiar surroundings that feel foreign to someone whose development was interrupted by experiences that eliminated most characteristics that once defined personality and social identity, wondering whether the education gained through witnessing American dream mythology justifies the price paid for learning that individual opportunity often serves primarily to enrich people who never risk their own security while promising others wealth that rarely materializes through honest labor under conditions designed to extract rather than reward human effort. The California gold rush promised to transform ordinary men into wealthy ones. It kept that promise, just not in the way anyone expected. It transformed them, all right, into broken, hollow versions of who they used to be. Our journey ends here, but for the real 49ers, there was no ending. Only the slow recognition that some prices can't be calculated in advance, and some dreams cost more than anyone should ever have to pay. The American dream has always been seductive because it promises that individual effort can overcome any obstacle. The California gold rush revealed the darker truth, that sometimes the dream itself becomes the obstacle, and the only way to win is to never play the game at all. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most defining and destructive myths. The real treasure, as it turns out, was never the gold they didn't find. It was the lives they traded away looking for it.